Today we have Dr. Alfred Cochran with us to talk about some things he does with his courses with writing. And Alfred, tell us what you do at K-State.
I'm professor of music and also the interim assistant provost.
Wonderful, wonderful. You and I visited just briefly one day about writing, and you were telling me some things that you have done. Just fill us in on where you got to the point that you are and with writing in your courses.
I'd be happy to. The journaling, of course,
yes,
is where we began this conversation. And I started asking my private students in the studio to keep a journal probably more than 25 years
wow.
ago. And the reason, the rationale was to make sure that their practice had intentionality and that they were able to ascertain in a more objective way what kind of progress they were making, because you know, as musicians,
to reflect on what they were doing,
and to be able to look back on their progress and see what they had achieved.
Great idea.
Well, it works, and that was my start. And then, with the implementation of our UGE, I was teaching the history of jazz class, and so I thought, well, one of the things I want to stress here is the notion of critical listening. And what better way to do that than to have the students write each week on a given set of musical selections.
Good.
And I've even done that in my intercession classes where they're submitting every day.
Good.
And what I found was that even the students that had very limited musical knowledge, by the end of the semester, were writing at a very sophisticated level in terms of their critical listening skills. And of course, it didn't hurt their specific skills in terms of just putting the words on the paper and organizing their thoughts.
It's at so many levels to me, the learning, because of course we're in music, so talking about the active listening, because audiences are really important to the musical experience, and yet a lot of people never learn how to be an active listener. So this was focusing on that level, but then also on just the perception level through the jazz, what are you hearing, and then also, like you said, just the thinking about what am I hearing, and being able to put it down and how I'm feeling.
Well, and a perfect example of that, if you talk to a student, an average student who's not had a lot of background in music, they might say that they like what they hear on the radio, and yet if you ask them if they like to hear a symphony orchestra, for example, they'd say, no, I don't understand that. And yet, if you show them that listening to the exposition of a symphony is built in the same way as the popular tunes, then it gives them a bridge of understanding that I think is very helpful. And writing it down, as you and I were talking about just a few minutes ago, helps to reinforce that notion. And
there's a very integral part in the learning process, I believe, that's tied to writing. And it'd probably be very interesting to do lots of research on the muscle and what it's doing in the brain, but there's a lot going on, I think.
I can remember one in particular, a young lady that I had, and she was an art major, a very bright student, and was very active in participating in the class. But on her daily journaling, I saw that she was not turning anything in at all. And so I caught her after class one day and I said, help me to understand what's going on here. She said, I don't have the ability, I don't have the skill to put into words what I'm thinking. And so I said, well, what can you put on paper? And so she came back the next day and she had a picture. And I said, okay, now explain to me what this picture represents to you. And it was a wonderful explanation of the music that she had heard. And so then I said to her, okay, now put on paper what you've just told me. And after that, she was no problems. Then there was another one that I think maybe you and I talked about. This was over 25 years ago now. Had a young lady who was in my studio, and her father was killed in a tragic accident. And she used the journaling to work through part of that grief.
Grieving process.
And it was hard for me to read it, and in fact I didn't have the courage to do it for over a year. But when I did go back, it was very touching to see how she had used that in a cathartic way.
Yeah. How do you grade? Do you put a grade on any of this, or?
I do, and at first, to get the wheels turning, because this is so well, it's so foreign to what some of these people are doing to be able to talk about aesthetic type things, or to link the objective to the subjective.
Yeah.
At first, I'm very lenient in the way that I grade, and then I gradually ask them through the feedback, to focus in on some of these specific areas, and then the grading scale gets more difficult as it goes through. But it's really not a problem, because they're ready to accept those challenges. Because by sort of gradually raising the bar, then their own curiosity and natural desire to want to do a good job kicks in, and it's fun for me in that sense, because it doesn't take a lot of the stick. It's mostly carrot.
And part of it is getting them, like you were saying, to that point where they start saying, I can do this, I can do this. Yeah. Do you grade very heavily on grammatical areas? Or
That's the way I was brought up, and so that's a part of it. But especially early on, I try to overlook
You're
a lot
more
of
lenient.
that.
Yeah.
But I try to offer suggestions as I go through that, maybe this is not the right way to say this. Is there a way that you can say this with greater clarity, or something of that
Do you
nature?
mainly write back on the journal to them? Is that how y'all communicate, or is it through
It's
email?
all done email. Until the very end, and then I do ask them as part of a portfolio to turn in all of the journaling that they've done, and they'll turn in what they've submitted and my responses too.
Good.
But I found it to be a whole lot easier if it's all done.
More time, probably time-wise too.
And here, just in my most recent sessions, I've had them use the K-State Online and just put it in a Dropbox. It's immediately sent to me, and then I handle it in that way.
Good. So you're using online. Yeah.
And
good.
it's worked very well.
Yeah. Good. Do you know what the percentage is of their total grade, or just off the top of your head?
Yes, it's about 13% in that.
So it's a pretty, if you'll do this assignment, it's helping your grade.
I wanted to make sure that they can't get an A unless they.
Oh, that's a good
do
idea.
well on
13%, good idea.
Yeah.
To me, it's very interesting about writing about music, because the arts and music came to be because it talks in a way that words can't talk to us. It speaks. And so sometimes it's hard to write. I can understand what that art major was saying, because it's hard to put in words sometimes what a nonverbal communication is telling you.
And it helps to give them some help in terms of the just basic building blocks. Melody, rhythm, harmony.
Yeah, so they can talk about it. Yeah.
But then, like you're saying, I asked them, what does an orange taste like? What does a rose smell like? Just to get them engaged in that aesthetic judgment kind of a thing. And it helps them to realize, too, that there's not necessarily a right answer.
That's right. Of course, we're in the arts, but I love that part of the arts, because a lot of times we can have 130 students. There'll be 130 different answers, all correct. There's not just one right answer sometimes.
And that's where it's helpful for me to go back to be, like we're talking about form, for example, an ABA form.
My favorite.
Well, and it links that symphony we were talking about with the popular tune. Then by having that they can hang their hat on, it gives them more reassurance that it's not all just subjective.
Sure. Yeah, and they begin to hear in new ways, I hope.
Oh, they do. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's neat. I'm so glad you involve your students in writing. I think it takes the learning to a different level. But a lot of people are hesitant because it is time intensive, but you've got a real good system going using the K-State Online and the email and just kind of doing it electronically.
Well, one of the things that's been most surprising for me, I instituted this part in the class because in terms of the UGE requirements, it demanded an active student participation. And so I thought this is a good way to do that. What I didn't realize was that when I survey the class at the end of the semester, invariably they say that this was one of the most important parts of the whole class.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, isn't that interesting? And I don't believe you would have gotten that had the writing not been there.
Oh, I agree, and I wouldn't have guessed it either. I thought that they might have hesitated.
All these people that we've been talking to, all these professors, students come back and tell them that very same thing. Don't get rid of this part, it's very important.
Yep.
And I think that's interesting. I think part of it is the focus. You're focusing and you're reflecting, and those are important learnings. Thank you, Alfred,
You're welcome.
so much. Glad you're doing
I
it.
enjoyed being